The air in the Crystal Pavilion wasn't just thick with the scent of 1,000 hothouse roses and the cloying sweetness of expensive champagne. Tonight, it vibrated. You could almost taste the electricity, a nervous hum beneath the polished veneer of high society, a place where smiles were weapons and pleasantries often concealed daggers. Fortunes were being pledged to the Children's Wellness Fund. Yes, a noble cause for a noble crowd. But the real currency being traded, the one everyone truly coveted, was gossip, speculation, and the subtle, brutal dance of power. Who was in? Who was out? Who was truly winning this silent, opulent war? And then, as if summoned by the unspoken question, the grand ballroom doors, towering monoliths of gilded oak, swung open. Silence. Not a complete absence of sound, but a sudden, sharp intake of collective breath, a hushing of the cultivated laughter and the clinking of crystal that was more profound than any shout. It was as if someone had pressed a giant pause button on the glittering attendees, each one a star in their own firmament, now momentarily eclipsed. Who could command such a reaction? What sort of earth-shattering entrance could silence the city's most powerful, most jaded elite, people who'd seen it all and feigned interest in even less? It was Elara Vance, a name that was supposed to be a whisper, a half-forgotten melody, a footnote in the annals of Marcus Thorne's spectacular, often ruthless rise. The forgotten wife, the woman he'd shed like last season's couture, discarded with a chillingly public efficiency that had been the talk of the town for months. Yet, there she stood. Not a ghost, though she was pale enough to be one, her gown a whisper of ivory silk that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, a void in the otherwise dazzling room. It was a stark, almost monastic simplicity against the riot of color and jewels that adorned every other woman in the room, each vying to outshine the next. She moved with an unnatural calm, a terrifying grace that spoke of immense control, her presence an immediate, undeniable shockwave that rippled through the opulent chamber, unsettling the carefully arranged power dynamics like a stone dropped into a still, predatory pond. Across the room, by the towering ice sculpture of a swan. A swan, how tragically ironic. He'd once called her his swan. Marcus Thorne himself froze. Mid-laugh, his head thrown back, a champagne flute halfway to his lips, charming a senator and his bejeweled wife. The bonhomie drained from his face as if a tap had been opened, leaving behind a mask of stunned disbelief, quickly hardening into something else. Something uneasy, almost fearful. Can you imagine? The man who thought he controlled everything, the puppet master of boardrooms and bedrooms alike, suddenly looking like he'd seen a specter from a past he'd meticulously, brutally tried so hard to bury. A past he thought was dead and buried. How wrong can one man be? Beside him, his new flame, Seraphina Dubois, a vision in crimson satin so tight it looked painted on, her décolletage a brazen challenge, felt the shift before she even saw its cause. Her laughter, moments before a tinkling melody designed to captivate and ensnare, caught in her throat like a fishbone. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows, masterpieces of disdainful elegance, drew together as her eyes, sharp and assessing as a predator sizing up an unexpected rival, narrowed. She followed Marcus's petrified gaze, her own ruby lips parting slightly, and a slow, venomous understanding dawned on her face. Oh, this was unexpected. This was a problem. A big one. Her manicured hand, which had been resting possessively on Marcus's arm, tightened, her scarlet nails digging almost imperceptibly into his expensive tuxedo. The whisper started then, a sibilant tide rising to fill the void Elara's entrance had created, spreading like wildfire in dry grass. Is that Elara Vance? It can't be. She wouldn't dare. What is she doing here looking like that? Someone hissed, their voice dripping with a mixture of shock and delicious malice. After everything, the sheer audacity. Each murmur was a tiny poisoned dart, yet Elara seemed impervious, her chin held high, her gaze sweeping the room with a deliberate, almost regal slowness that dismissed them all as inconsequential. She remembered, of course. How could she forget? The memories were etched into her soul, scars that no amount of time, no amount of carefully constructed composure could fully erase. The brutal discard. Marcus, standing in their sun-drenched morning room, their room, a place she had filled with light and laughter. The scent of the white lilies she loved so much, he'd once pretended to love so much, filling the air like a funeral dirge, telling her it was over. Just like that. No preamble, no remorse, just a cold, clinical severance, as if she were a mismanaged subsidiary being cut loose. "It's better this way, Elara," he'd said, his voice devoid of any emotion she could recognize, his eyes already looking past her, towards his gleaming future. A clean break. Clean for him, perhaps. For her, it had been a public vivisection. The tabloids, those vultures, had had a field day. Thorne trades in for a newer, shinier model, complete with unflattering, tear-streaked pictures of her juxtaposed against Serafina's glossy, triumphant perfection. She recalled one particularly cruel caricature that had made her physically sick. The humiliation had been a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs, leaving her gasping in the ruins of the life she'd painstakingly built, the life she'd foolishly believed was theirs. He'd left her with what he thought was nothing, stripped of her standing, her home, her dignity, her very identity, or so he presumed. What a fool he'd been. But inside Elara, beneath the ice of her composure, a different kind of fire was beginning to smolder. A flicker of the old pain. Yes, it was always there. A dull ache in her chest, a phantom limb of a love long dead. But it was quickly, almost fiercely, overshadowed by a steely resolve, a strength she hadn't known she possessed until she'd been forced to dig for it in the barren earth of her despair, sifting through the ashes of her former self. "They thought they buried me," she thought, the ghost of a smile, or was it a grimace of determination, touching her lips. "They didn't realize I was a seed that had lain dormant, yes, but had been watered by tears of betrayal and nourished by the bitter ashes of humiliation." And what does it take, do you think, to rise from that kind of devastation? To not just survive, but to transform into something far more formidable than before? The air in the Crystal Pavilion crackled now, not just with curiosity, but with an unspoken tension, a palpable sense of a battlefield being subtly, yet irrevocably, defined. This wasn't just a charity gala anymore, it was an arena, and Elara Vance, the woman who was supposed to be ashes, had just walked into it, an empress in her own right, ready to survey her new domain. Every head was turned, every eye upon her, the collective weight of their scrutiny enough to crush a lesser woman. But Elara was no longer that woman. As she took a step further into the room, the scent of lilies, her favorite, inexplicably seemed to cut through the cloying perfumes and the aroma of rich food, a clean, pure fragrance. It was a scent Marcus had once claimed to adore. A scent that had filled their homes, their lives, a symbol of their once shared dreams. Now she imagined he probably despised it, a reminder of a past he'd tried to obliterate, a past that was now staring him in the face. But for Elara, tonight, it was the scent of reclamation. This wasn't merely an appearance. No, this was a declaration. An unspoken challenge laid down on the polished marble floor, as clear as the diamonds sparkling at the throats of the women who now stared at her with a mixture of fear and awe. The game, whatever it was, had just begun. And Marcus Thorne, along with everyone else in that glittering, suddenly breathless room, was about to find out that Elara Vance was a player he had catastrophically, fatally underestimated. The question is, are you ready to see how this plays out? Elara accepted a glass of champagne from a hovering waiter, her hand perfectly steady, betraying none of the turmoil that had once threatened to consume her. Her gaze, cool and assessing, swept the room once more, lingering for a fraction of a second on the stunned faces, the dropped jaws, the calculating eyes already weighing odds and choosing sides. Finally, her eyes found Marcus's. Across the expanse of crystal and silk, their gazes locked. A silent, loaded challenge passed between them, a promise of storms to come, of scores to be settled. Then, with an almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips, a smile that held no warmth but an ocean of intent, she turned away. She left him standing there, a statue of gilded shock, and she left everyone, including you, wondering, what on earth was Elara Vance truly capable of now? The forgotten wife was back, and the rules of engagement had just been rewritten. What would her first move be? And how would the mighty Marcus Thorne react when the whispers of war finally reached his ears? You won't want to miss a single moment of what happens next, because this is just the beginning. As Elara Vance, an apparition in ivory, moved deeper into the opulent ballroom of the Crystal Pavilion, the whispers followed her like a trail of gunpowder, crackling with a mixture of disbelief and delicious anticipation. Marcus Thorne, usually the undisputed master of his domain, found his eyes inexorably drawn to her, an unsettling premonition stirring deep within his gut. He'd built an empire on predicting market shifts and human weakness, but this was a variable he hadn't accounted for. The woman he thought he'd erased was now the most talked-about person in a room filled with the city's luminaries. What did it mean? And more importantly, what did she want? Elara, however, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, or perhaps she simply chose to ignore them, her composure a silken armor. She wasn't just gracing the event, she was working it, a general surveying her soon-to-be battlefield. The first, deliciously public salvo in this silent war came not from Elara herself, but from one of the city's grand dames, a woman whose social pronouncements carried the weight of royal decrees. "My dear Elara, Mrs. Vance, isn't it now?" boomed Beatrice Albright, a woman whose pronouncements could make or break social careers, her voice carrying with deliberate, almost weaponized clarity over the polite chatter. She extended a diamond-encrusted hand, the gesture both a greeting and a demand for attention. "What an absolute pleasure to see you outshining us all. That gown, so audaciously simple. Only a woman of true confidence, or one with absolutely nothing left to prove, could carry it off." The compliment was double-edged, a public acknowledgement that also subtly highlighted Elara's departure from the ostentatious Thorne fold. It was aimed, quite obviously, at a nearby table where Seraphina Dubois was holding court, her crimson dress suddenly looking a tad too loud, a touch too desperate in comparison. Did you see Seraphina's smile tighten, just for a heartbeat? It was a blink and you'll miss it flicker, but it was there. The first tiny crack in the new queen's meticulously crafted facade. Seraphina even leaned towards Marcus, her voice a low hiss meant only for him. Is that old relic trying to make a statement, darling, or just embarrass herself further? Elara's responding smile, however, was genuine, warm even, disarming the slight barb with effortless grace. "Beatrice, you're too kind. It's wonderful to see you looking so radiant yourself." She then, with practiced ease, turned the conversation away from herself and towards the evening's cause, the Children's Literacy Project, a new initiative aimed at funding libraries in underserved city districts. And this is where the room truly began to take notice. This wasn't the demure, often overshadowed Mrs. Thorne they vaguely remembered, the one who mostly nodded and smiled. This was a woman speaking with quiet authority, with a depth of knowledge about the project's challenges and potential that was nothing short of astounding. She discussed nuanced funding models with a prominent city councilman, referencing recent successes in other municipalities. She then turned to the university chancellor, respectfully challenging his skepticism about community engagement. "Chancellor," Elara said, her tone earnest, "if we don't actively involve the parents, if we don't make these libraries true community hubs, are we not merely building beautiful mausoleums for books they may never feel empowered to open?" Her passion wasn't a performance, it was a palpable force. "We're not just talking about books, Councilman," Elara stated earlier, her voice clear and resonant. "We're talking about futures, about breaking cycles. Surely that's an investment worth making without bureaucratic entanglement?" The councilman, initially dismissive, found himself nodding, genuinely intrigued. These were not the conversations of a decorative socialite. These were the insights of a leader, a visionary. How had they all missed this sleeping giant? More pointedly, how had Marcus Thorne, a man famed for his acuity, missed this burning intelligence right under his own roof for so many years? From across the room, Marcus watched, a muscle twitching insistently in his jaw, a tell he thought he'd long since conquered. He'd always known Elara was intelligent. She had a mind like a steel trap, sharp and retentive, capable of recalling the smallest detail from a decade-old contract. He'd just never considered it a threat, more of a convenient accessory to his own brilliance, someone to proofread his speeches and remember the names of dull business associates. Now, seeing her command attention, not through his reflected glory, but through her own undeniable substance, an unfamiliar and deeply unsettling unease coiled in his stomach. It wasn't just her presence, it was the way she was present, self-possessed, articulate, a quiet force. It felt like watching a familiar landscape suddenly rearrange itself into something foreign and dangerous. Seraphina, ever attuned to his moods when they suited her, sensed his disquiet. She leaned closer, her voice a seductive purr, her perfume a heavy, cloying gardenia, a stark contrast to the memory of lilies that now inexplicably teased his senses. "Darling, you're tense. Another tedious speech about to start? Shall we find a more amusing distraction?" Her hand traced a pattern on his arm. Her eyes, however, flickered towards Elara, a spark of pure, unadulterated jealousy igniting their depths. But Marcus barely registered her touch, his gaze still fixed on the woman he thought he knew, the woman who was rapidly, terrifyingly proving him wrong. His smile was strained, a mere pulling of lips. "Just business, my dear." Business? Or the dawning, horrifying realization that he'd made a monumental, perhaps unforgivable miscalculation? Later, amidst the orchestrated chaos of networking and air-kissing, Elara found a quiet alcove, shielded by a monstrous, out-of-place fern that looked as uncomfortable as she sometimes felt in these settings. She pulled out a sleek, burner phone. Untraceable, of course, a precaution learned from years of observing Marcus's own clandestine dealings, and dialed a number. Her best friend, Clara Hayes, answered on the first ring, her voice a lifeline of sanity in this gilded madhouse. "Elara? Oh, thank God. I've been imagining all sorts. Are you all right? Did you see him? Is he livid?" Clara's voice was laced with a potent cocktail of anxiety and fierce loyalty. Elara leaned against the cool marble wall, a small sigh escaping her. The marble felt good, solid, real. "I'm fine, Clara. More than fine, actually. And yes, I saw him. And her." "And? Was it awful? Did he try anything?" "Less awful than I expected," Elara admitted, a note of surprise in her own voice. "Watching them together, it was almost clarifying. It confirmed everything I already knew. He's predictable in his betrayals, even in his choice of replacements. A little harsh? Maybe. But honesty was a luxury she now afforded herself." There was a pause, then Clara's voice, sharper now. "So this grand entrance, it's not just about making him squirm, is it? You have that look in your voice, Elara, the one you get when you're about to dismantle something. Or someone. Remember what he did to the Ashworths? Left them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a ruined name, all over a minor disagreement. That's the man you're poking." Elara allowed herself a small, cold smile. The Ashworths. Yes, she remembered. A brutal lesson in Marcus's capacity for corporate destruction. "He took everything from me, Clara. Or he tried to. My name, my security, my peace of mind. And you're going to take it back? All of it? Elara, be careful. He's ruthless. You know that better than anyone." "Oh, I know." Elara's voice dropped, a silken threat, each word imbued with chilling conviction. "He taught me ruthlessness, Clara. He was an excellent, if unintentional, teacher. And he forgot I was a dedicated student. He forgot I paid attention to all his lessons, even the ones he didn't know he was giving. The ones whispered in late-night calls he thought I was too asleep to hear." This wasn't just about getting even. This was about leveling the entire playing field, about rewriting the rules of his savage game. What would you do if you had the knowledge to turn your oppressors' tactics against them? Would you dare to play their game, but better? Elara dared. The crescendo of the evening arrived with the charity auction. An auctioneer, all theatrical flair and rapid-fire patter, was coaxing astronomical bids for glittering jewels that could fund a small nation. Exotic holidays to islands most people only dreamed of, and priceless artworks that would disappear into private, temperature-controlled vaults. Marcus, back in his element, or so he thought, had just made a conspicuously large bid on a hideous modern sculpture. All sharp angles and rusted metal, a piece Serafina had gushed over, earning a smattering of applause, his confidence seemingly restored. He was the king here, wasn't he? This was his stage, his audience. Then, the auctioneer moved to a special item, the full underwriting of the Children's Literacy Project's first flagship library. "We're looking for a truly transformative gift, ladies and gentlemen. A legacy pledge. A chance to change thousands of young lives. Do I hear $500,000 to kick us off?" A hush fell. It was a significant sum, even for this crowd, a crowd that thought nothing of dropping 6 figures on a handbag. Just as Marcus was preparing to make a grand, magnanimous gesture, a gesture designed to reassert his dominance, to remind everyone who held the real philanthropic power, and to utterly erase Elara's earlier unsettling impact. A calm, clear voice cut through the silence from a discreet table near the back, a table no one had been paying much attention to. 1 million. Every head swiveled, every eye focused. It was Elara, standing, her expression serene, almost beatific. The auctioneer, a man rarely lost for words, blinked. 1 million? From? He consulted his notes, a confused frown appearing. This name, this foundation, wasn't on his list of expected high rollers. Elara's voice, amplified by the microphone a waiter quickly and rather nervously provided, was steady, devoid of any tremor. The pledge is from the Phoenix Legacy Foundation, the Phoenix Legacy. A name no one in that room had ever heard of. Where did that come from? Who was the Phoenix Legacy? And how on earth did Elara Vance, the woman supposedly left destitute, command such a sum? The mystery alone was enough to set tongues wagging for weeks, months even. The air thrummed with unanswered questions. And let me tell you, the source of that funding? That's a whole other secret. A delicious little bomb just waiting to go off later. Don't you dare miss finding out about that. If you think this is a shock, wait till you hear the real story behind the money. A wave of stunned applause, far more genuine and enthusiastic than Marcus's had received for his ugly sculpture, erupted through the ballroom. It was a tidal wave of sound. Elara had not just matched him. She'd effortlessly doubled his implied generosity, and she'd done it with an air of quiet conviction that made his earlier bid look like crass showboating. She hadn't just stolen his thunder. She'd hijacked the entire storm, rerouting it with devastating precision. Marcus's face was a carefully blank canvas, but the tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible clenching of his jaw, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped the stem of his champagne flute, spoke volumes. He was seething. Oh, he was beyond seething. This was a direct hit, a precision strike against his ego, his reputation, his very public largesse. Serafina, less adept at masking her emotions or perhaps simply not bothering, glared openly at Elara, her crimson lips thinned into a furious line. If looks could kill, Elara would have been incinerated on the spot. The silent battle had just escalated, and the first visible wound had been inflicted, right on Marcus Thorne's gilded stage. Score 1 for the forgotten wife. Indeed. As the gala wound down, the energy slowly seeping from the room as guests began to filter out, Elara didn't linger. She had made her statement, planted her flag. A newfound sense of purpose radiated from her, a quiet hum of power that was far more compelling than any overt display. She moved towards the exit, alone, her ivory gown flowing around her like moonlight on still water. Just as she reached the grand doors, a hand shot out, gripping her arm with bruising force. Marcus. His eyes were burning, a dangerous cocktail of fury, confusion, and something akin to a horrified shock. "What game are you playing, Elara?" he growled, his voice low and menacing, his grip tightening, his face far too close. The carefully constructed facade of the charming philanthropist had vanished, replaced by the ruthless, predatory tycoon she knew all too well. Elara met his gaze, her own cool and unwavering. She didn't try to pull her arm away, though his fingers felt like steel bands. Instead, a small, enigmatic smile touched her lips, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, those cool, assessing eyes. "The one I intend to win, Marcus." With that, she extricated her arm with a surprising, almost shocking strength, turned with a grace that mocked his aggression, and walked out into the cool night air, leaving him standing there, momentarily speechless, the echo of her words hanging between them like a drawn sword. The first spark had been struck. The whispers of war were about to become a roar. Back in the cold, echoing emptiness of what was once her vibrant home, now just the shell of Thorne Manor, Elara didn't mourn the life she'd lost within its walls. No, mourning was a luxury she'd indulged in for far too long, a debilitating poison. Instead, with a newfound energy thrumming through her veins, an almost feverish clarity of purpose, she moved with brisk efficiency towards her old dressing room, a place filled with ghosts and forgotten dreams, a place she hadn't entered in months. From a cleverly hidden compartment behind a loose floorboard, a secret Marcus in his monumental arrogance had never discovered, she retrieved a small, antique wooden box. It was intricately carved from some dark, unfamiliar wood, smooth with age, a relic he had once dismissed as worthless junk during one of his tyrannical decluttering rampages. "More of your sentimental clutter, Elara," he'd sneered. Its contents, however, were anything but clutter. Its contents, she knew, were the first true key to dismantling his empire, piece by painful piece. and she couldn't wait to turn it. What secrets could such a small, unassuming box hold? And how would they irrevocably change everything for everyone involved? You'll have to stick around to find out, because this story is just getting started. The victory at the gala was symbolic, a beautifully executed opening move, but Elara Vance knew symbols didn't dismantle empires. Real power, the kind that could bring a man like Marcus Thorne to his knees, lay in knowledge, meticulous strategic planning, and the cold, hard execution of a well-laid plan. Alone in her new, modest apartment, a stark, almost Spartan contrast to the gilded cage of Thorne Manor, she began to assemble her arsenal. The city outside hummed with oblivious life, its denizens caught up in their own dramas, unaware that within these four plain walls, a silent war, a war of devastating potential, was being meticulously engineered. With hands that were surprisingly steady, given the tremor in her soul, Elara retrieved the small, antique wooden box from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard in the unassuming bedroom closet. The scent of old wood, cedar perhaps, and forgotten secrets clung to it, a faint, dry perfume of the past. The lock, old and a little stiff, finally clicked open with a satisfying thud, a sound that seemed to echo the closing of one chapter of her life and the ominous, thrilling opening of another. And what lay within? No glittering jewels, no forgotten love letters from a time when Marcus might have feigned affection. Oh no, far more valuable. Inside, nestled on faded, moth-eaten velvet, were several meticulously kept journals, their leather covers worn smooth with time and handling, and a single, anonymous, untraceable SIM card. Jackpot. Can you even imagine the thrill, the sheer terrifying power of holding your enemy's past mistakes, his darkest secrets, right there in your hands? It was like holding a lit match over a barrel of gunpowder. Elara's fingers, usually so composed, trembled slightly as she opened the first journal, its pages brittle and yellowed. The ink was faded in places, but Marcus's familiar, arrogant scrawl was still legible, detailing his early business dealings, the often shady, ethically dubious maneuvers that had laid the foundation for his vast empire. These were the vulnerabilities he'd long forgotten, the skeletons he thought were safely buried deep in the bedrock of his success, protected by layers of lawyers and offshore accounts. Questionable land acquisitions that involved displacing vulnerable communities with paltry compensation. Aggressive negotiations that bordered on outright extortion, complete with veiled threats. Conveniently overlooked environmental regulations for his initial polluting factories. Even hints of backroom deals with less than savory characters, names that would make even the jaded city council blush. One entry detailed how he'd bankrupted a small, family-owned competitor by systematically poaching their staff and then launching a predatory pricing war, all while publicly lamenting their inability to adapt. The casual cruelty of it, the sheer glee in his written words, sent a shiver down Elara's spine. It was a roadmap to his weak points, his Achilles' heels. He'd been so arrogant, so sure of his invincibility, that he'd actually documented his sins, perhaps as a perverse sort of trophy collection. How ironic, how perfect for her plans. The SIM card was her next focus. Clean, unregistered, the ghost line. Her first call, made from a windswept public park miles from her apartment, the city noise a convenient cloak, was to a name resurrected from the depths of Marcus's personnel archives, a file she'd made a point to copy before her unceremonious departure from Thorne Manor. It was a name associated with a particularly brutal corporate discard years ago, David Renard. Renard had been a brilliant, innovative project manager, the rising star of Thorne Development Group, the architect of some of Marcus's earliest successes. Until he dared to question one of Marcus's more ethically flexible directives on the foundation integrity of a downtown high-rise. Marcus, in his typical fashion, hadn't just fired him. He'd systematically destroyed Renard's reputation, blacklisting him throughout the industry with insidious, well-placed lies. A classic Thorne move, utter annihilation for any perceived slight, any challenge to his absolute authority. Elara arranged to meet David Renard in a discreet, out-of-the-way cafe in a forgotten corner of the city. The kind of place where conversations could be had without fear of prying eyes or listening ears. The aroma of stale coffee, cheap disinfectant, and lingering desperation thick in the air. It was a far cry from the polished haunts Marcus frequented. David arrived looking weathered, a ghost of his former self. He was older than she remembered, perhaps only by 5 years, but those years had carved deep lines into his face. The spark in his eyes, once so bright with intelligence and ambition, was now dimmed by years of struggle, his suit respectable but clearly well-worn, the cuffs slightly frayed. There were lines of bitterness etched around his mouth, but beneath the wariness, Elara saw the ghost of the brilliant mind that Marcus had so carelessly, so cruelly, tried to extinguish. He was wary, his gaze guarded as he slid into the cracked vinyl booth opposite her. Who wouldn't be? A call from the ex-wife of the man who ruined you? It screamed trap. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice raspy, heavy with suspicion, unused to formal address after years in the professional wilderness. "This is unexpected, to say the least." "Mr. Renard," Elara replied, her voice calm, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through her. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. "Thank you for coming. I know this must seem unusual." "Unusual is one word for it," he said bluntly, no time for pleasantries. "Why am I here? No offense, Mrs. Vance, but anything to do with Marcus Thorne is something I'd rather leave in my rearview mirror. He crushed me. He didn't just take my job, he took my future, my name. He made sure I wouldn't work in this city or any other ever again in my field." The rawness in his voice was palpable, a wound still festering after all this time. Elara nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering, meeting his without flinching. "I understand your reservations, Mr. Renard. Better than you know. I've had my own experiences with Marcus's particular brand of generosity." She then, with quiet intensity, laid out her meticulously researched understanding of Marcus's current flagship project, the jewel in his corporate crown, the Zenith Tower. It was a monstrous skyscraper of gleaming glass and steel, a testament to Marcus's boundless ego, designed to dominate the city skyline and cement his legacy. But Elara, armed with the explosive knowledge from those damning journals and her own sharp observations from years spent silently by Marcus's side, years he'd assumed she was merely a decorative appendage, incapable of understanding the complexities of his world, painted a very different picture. She highlighted its dangerously overleveraged financing, the paper-thin margins, the complex web of interdependent contractors, some of whom were already grumbling about late payments and impossible deadlines, whispers she'd cultivated through Clara's network. She pointed out specific structural dependencies, potential choke points in the supply chain, vulnerabilities that only someone with intimate, almost unnervingly precise knowledge could perceive. "For example," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, "the primary steel supplier for the Zenith, Kestrel Fabrications, Marcus strong-armed them into an exclusivity contract with impossibly tight margins. They're teetering on the edge of bankruptcy themselves. A nudge, a whisper to their creditors, and Marcus's entire timeline collapses." She even had discreetly obtained preliminary architectural plans, copies of copies, naturally, spread out between them on the chipped Formica tabletop, marked with her own neat, damning annotations. David Renard listened, his initial skepticism slowly, almost imperceptibly, giving way to a grudging, then astonished interest. The technical details, the financial intricacies Elara laid bare, they were astonishingly accurate, terrifyingly insightful. This wasn't just gossip, this was high-level corporate intelligence. How did she know all this? Where did this information, this power, come from? "This isn't just about revenge, David," Elara said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, leaning in, her eyes the color of a stormy sea, locking onto his. "Though, let's be honest, a little part of me wouldn't mind seeing him sweat, seeing him feel even a fraction of what he put us through. This is about justice. It's about accountability for men like Marcus who believe they're above the rules, above consequence. And for you," she paused, letting her words sink in, letting him taste the possibility, "it's a chance to rebuild what he took. A chance to show the world, and especially him, what David Renard is truly capable of when not shackled by a tyrant." She then played her trump card. She spoke of a new, discreetly established entity, Vance Strategic Holdings. Her voice was low, compelling, resonant with hidden depths of funding. "I have resources, Mr. Renard, significant, untraceable resources." She didn't elaborate on their source, letting the mystery hang in the air, adding to her mystique. A small, almost invisible smile played on her lips as she said it. And you just know that anonymous benefactor is pulling some serious strings here, right? This isn't just about Elara's meager divorce settlement, is it? Oh, the secrets we have yet to uncover. This network runs deeper than anyone suspects. I'm offering you a substantial stake, Mr. Renard. Not just a salary, but a partnership, equity. A chance to be at the forefront of readjusting the balance of power in this city. She slid a sleek obsidian black business card across the table. It bore only the name Vance Strategic Holdings and a single encrypted contact number. No address, no frills, pure, understated power. David stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time not as Thorne's discarded ex, but as a formidable, strategic force in her own right. Her preparedness was unnerving, her information almost supernaturally precise. Some of the details she knew about the Zenith Tower's internal workings, the specific personalities of the key contractors, the precise wording of certain overlooked clauses in their agreements, they couldn't have come from public records. It hinted at sources deep within Thorne's own organization, or perhaps something even more powerful. Who was this woman? And who or what was backing her with such formidable resources? The questions were tantalizing, almost frightening, but the opportunity was irresistible. A slow, almost wolfish, deeply vengeful smile finally spread across David Renard's face, chasing away some of the weariness, igniting that dormant spark in his eyes. A spark that had been banked for far too long. It was the smile of a man who had been handed a weapon, a very sharp weapon, and knew exactly, precisely how to use it. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice no longer raspy but imbued with a newfound, dangerous energy, the sound of a sleeping tiger awakened. "Where do we begin?" And just like that, the first unlikely yet utterly potent alliance was forged. The architect of retribution had found her master builder. The game was truly afoot. They began to map out their strategy right there in that dingy cafe, over lukewarm coffee and a shared, burning hunger for justice. Or was it revenge? Perhaps, in cases like this, the two are indistinguishable. Does it even matter when the target is someone like Marcus Thorne, a man who had sown so much destruction? They identified key subcontractors for the Zenith Tower, ones known to be disgruntled or financially precarious, ripe for a new, more lucrative offer from an anonymous competitor. They pinpointed critical land parcels adjacent to the main construction site, parcels Marcus needed for expansion or logistical support, parcels he'd arrogantly assumed he could acquire at his leisure, perhaps even bully the owners into selling cheaply. The plan was audacious, complex, and incredibly risky. Failure would mean utter ruin for both of them. But the potential payoff? The complete and utter dismantling of Marcus Thorne's empire, brick by gilded brick. It was a symphony of corporate espionage and vulnerability exploitation about to be conducted, with Elara Vance as the conductor. Meanwhile, across town, in the glittering salons and exclusive clubs that formed the glittering, treacherous ecosystem of the city's elite, Clara Hayes, Elara's loyal confidant and a woman with an impeccable social pedigree, began her own subtle, insidious campaign. Armed with her impeccable social credentials, a disarming smile that could charm a snake out of its skin, and a seemingly inexhaustible supply of innocent concern, Clara was a master of the art of the carefully placed whisper, the innocently posed question. "Have you heard about Serafina's latest shopping spree in Montechiello? 5 new Birkins, they say. Darling, the extravagance. One does wonder how Thorne Developments is really faring with the Zenith Tower's rumored budget overruns. I do hope Marcus hasn't bitten off more than he can chew." Or, to another influential ear, "Marcus seemed so stressed at the gala, didn't he? Almost haunted. Poor man. The pressure of keeping such a massive enterprise afloat must be immense, especially with those whispers about investor confidence starting to circulate." Nothing overt, nothing that could be traced back. Just tiny seeds of doubt, little drops of poison skillfully administered into the city's gossip-fueled bloodstream, subtly fueling rumors of instability, of financial precariousness within the usually unassailable Thorne Development Group. It was a brilliant two-pronged attack. Elara, the coolly calculating general, planning the direct strategic assaults. Clara, the charming spymaster, orchestrating the equally damaging campaign of psychological warfare. What a team, right? Do you think Marcus, in all his arrogance, even sees what's coming from these two fronts? I doubt it. He's too busy admiring his own reflection. While Elara Vance and David Renard meticulously plotted their surgical strikes against the foundations of the Zenith Tower, their every move cloaked in secrecy and funded by the enigmatic, almost mythical, Vance Strategic Holdings. Marcus Thorne, blissfully, fatally oblivious to the storm gathering directly above his perfectly coiffed head, was on his penthouse terrace with Serafina. The city lights glittered below like a carpet of scattered diamonds, a testament, he believed, to his enduring dominion. He swirled the expensive brandy in his crystal glass, dismissing Serafina's earlier vague concerns about Elara with his usual unshakable, infuriating arrogance. "Elara, darling, she's a nobody, a ghost. What could she possibly do to me, Marcus Thorne?" He was, of course, dangerously, spectacularly wrong. He had no idea that the very ground beneath his glittering empire was already beginning to tremble, that the architect of his retribution was already drawing up the blueprints for his spectacular downfall. And the first phase of that plan? It was about to unfold with a devastating precision that would leave him reeling, questioning everything he thought he knew. You absolutely cannot afford to miss how these first critical moves play out, because the shockwaves are about to hit. The dominoes, so carefully lined up by Elara Vance and her new eager ally, David Renard, began to fall, not with a thunderous crash, but with a series of small, almost imperceptible clicks that resonated deep within the foundations of Marcus Thorne's empire. His arrogance, for so long a blinding veil, had prevented him from seeing the meticulous architect of his impending doom. But the hunter, the apex predator of the city's corporate jungle, was about to discover he was, in fact, the hunted. The first true tremor, the one that signaled the whispers were escalating into something far more dangerous, began not in a boardroom, but in the opulent, sterile expanse of his penthouse, a stage set for domestic drama rather than corporate collapse. "The Zenith Tower is bleeding, Marcus, and you're acting like it's a damned paper cut." Serafina Dubois's voice, usually a silken purr designed to soothe and seduce, was a shrill shriek that bounced off the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the glittering, indifferent city. Her face, usually a mask of bored perfection, was contorted with a very real, very ugly fury. With a sudden, violent movement, she hurled the heavy crystal tumbler in her hand, the one containing his favorite single malt. It missed Marcus's head by a mere inch. Was that intentional, a near miss to terrify, or just a sign of her deteriorating aim under pressure? And shattered against the massive, imported Italian marble fireplace, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Shards of expensive crystal, like frozen tears of a fallen god, rained down onto the pristine white llama wool rug. So much for domestic bliss, eh? One has to wonder, doesn't one, if this is the first sign she's losing her own cool, or if she's playing an entirely different game we haven't seen yet. Marcus, who had been staring moodily into his own glass of amber liquid, didn't even flinch outwardly, though a muscle throbbed at his temple. His stress these past few weeks had manifested as a cold, simmering rage, a dangerous pressure building beneath his usually unflappable, Lord of the Universe exterior. "Don't be so melodramatic, Serafina," he bit out, his voice deceptively calm, each word a carefully dropped icicle. "It's a temporary cash flow issue. All large-scale projects of this magnitude encounter them. It's being handled, as always, by me." "Handled?" she scoffed, her crimson dress looking almost blood-like in the dim, atmospheric lighting of the penthouse. She stalked towards him, her movements feline and dangerous. "Is that what you call it when three of our primary steel suppliers suddenly have unforeseen contractual obligations elsewhere, all within a week? When that vital Oak Haven Avenue land parcel, the one you needed for the transport access and staging area, gets snapped up from under your nose by some shadowy shell corporation nobody's ever heard of?" "Vance Strategic Holdings. What even is that? Sounds like something your pathetic ex-wife would dream up in her little hovel." Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, designed to wound his pride as much as highlight his business failings. And that was the crux of it. Vance Strategic Holdings. Elara and David Renard, operating with the precision of seasoned saboteurs, had begun their systematic acquisition of assets crucial to the Zenith Tower. It started subtly, almost invisibly. A key subcontractor for the specialized, imported German curtain walling, suddenly found their crucial overseas credit lines frozen, their European bank citing newly discovered irregularities. Just days later, Vance Strategic Holdings, like a benevolent vulture, swept in with a generous buyout offer the beleaguered company couldn't possibly refuse. Then, a critical supplier of reinforced high-tensile concrete, a company Marcus had squeezed on price for years, driving them to the brink, suddenly declared an unexpected and ironclad loyalty to a new, better-paying client. Vance Strategic, of course. Each move was perfectly timed, often outbidding Thorn Development by a hair's breadth, utilizing what seemed like impeccable, almost psychic, insider knowledge of Marcus's own bidding strategies, his cash flow vulnerabilities, his pressure points. How did they know exactly when to strike, exactly how much to offer? The unseen, unheard influence of the still unseen anonymous benefactor was like a phantom hand guiding Elara's, ensuring every arrow found its mark, drawing blood every time. The first construction delays on the Zenith, small at first, began to be whispered about in the financial press, causing the first flicker of unease amongst the project's smaller, more nervous investors. Marcus, initially, had been blindsided, attributing the early setbacks to bad luck, to the usual cutthroat nature of the development game in a city built on ambition and backstabbing. But the pattern soon became undeniable, too precise to be coincidental. His CFO, Alistair Finch, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with worry lines these days, a man who looked like he hadn't seen his own bed in a week, delivered the grim news during a tense, early morning meeting in Marcus's stark, minimalist office, a temple to his own ego. Finch, his usual impeccable Savile Row suit looking a little rumpled, his tie askew, laid out a dossier detailing the latest series of devastating blows. "Sir," Finch began, his voice heavy with foreboding, almost a croak, "these aren't random incidents. I've run every analysis. It's not just bad luck, or even typical corporate rivalry from the likes of Blackwood. These moves, they're surgical, precisely targeted. It's as if someone has our internal playbook, knows our every vulnerability, every projected shortfall, and is systematically exploiting them. Someone is targeting us, sir, and they know exactly where and how hard to cut." He paused, then added, his voice dropping further, "This Vance Strategic Holdings, they materialized out of nowhere, well-funded, extremely aggressive, and their timing, frankly, sir, it's uncanny, almost as if they have foreknowledge." Marcus slammed his fist on the polished mahogany desk, the sound making Finch jump. "Find out who they are, Finch. I want names. I want connections. Is it Blackwood playing a deeper game? Or that vulture, Rickardson, trying to make a move while he thinks I'm distracted with the gala nonsense?" He rattled off the names of his known corporate rivals, the usual suspects in the brutal game of high-stakes real estate. The idea that Elara, his meek, pliable, discarded Elara, could be behind something of this magnitude was simply preposterous, utterly laughable. She wouldn't have the first clue how to orchestrate such a complex financial assault. "Don't waste your time looking at ghosts or chasing after women scorned, Finch," he'd snapped, his voice dripping with disdain. "Find me a real enemy, a worthy opponent." What a profound, almost tragic underestimation. Will he ever learn that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous? But Serafina, later that evening, as she surveyed the shattered crystal from her earlier outburst with a detached air, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips as a maid scurried to clean up the mess, wasn't so quick to dismiss the impossible. She'd seen that look in Elara's eyes at the gala, that cold, calculating fire, that unnerving poise. "Don't underestimate her, Marcus," she'd murmured, swirling the dregs of her wine, her voice a low, almost thoughtful caress that sent a shiver down his spine despite himself. "You men always do, don't you? You think because a woman is quiet, she's an idiot. Because she endures your indiscretions, your blatant disrespect, she's weak." She gave him a sideways glance, her expression unreadable, a perfect poker face. "Hell hath no fury like a woman you've publicly destroyed, darling. Especially one who might have been smarter than you ever gave her credit for. Maybe she's not as clueless as you always thought. Maybe she was just biding her time, learning, watching. Was it a genuine warning, a moment of surprising insight? Or was she subtly testing him, gauging his reaction, perhaps even enjoying the slow, delicious spectacle of his unraveling from a front row seat? Or, more disturbingly, did Serafina have her own hidden agenda? Her own reasons for wanting to see Marcus Thorne humbled? Perhaps even a past slight of her own she was looking to avenge through him. The ambiguity around her was a tightening knot of its own, a fascinating subplot in this unfolding drama. Her motives remained a tantalizing, dangerous mystery. Who was Serafina Dubois, really? And whose side was she truly on? Marcus, however, caught between Finch's dire warnings and Serafina's unsettling, almost taunting insinuations, felt the walls closing in. The financial pressure on the Zenith Tower was becoming immense. Investors, smelling blood in the water, were getting skittish, their once fawning calls now tinged with pointed questions, demanding reassurances he was finding increasingly difficult to provide with his usual bluster. The project, his magnificent monument to himself, was indeed bleeding, hemorrhaging cash and credibility. Desperate to stop the flow, to project an image of unshakable strength and liquidity, Marcus made a typically bold, typically arrogant, and ultimately incredibly risky financial maneuver. He secured a massive, short-term, high-interest loan from a notoriously predatory lender, Titan Capital, a group known for their ruthless collection tactics, using a significant portion of his other more stable assets, including a hefty stake in his media holdings, as collateral. It was a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice, designed to plug the immediate financial gaps and keep construction on the Zenith Tower moving, to show the world, and whoever this damned Vance strategic was, that Marcus Thorne was still in control, still the master of his universe. He was convinced, with the unshakable self-belief that had always been both his greatest strength and his most profound weakness, that he could outmaneuver this, refinance, find new, more pliable investors before the crippling interest payments came due. He always had before. Why would this time be any different? Oh, Marcus, when will you realize the game has changed because the player has changed so fundamentally? Elara, through David Renard's still active network of disgruntled ex-Thorne employees. Amazing how loyalty evaporates when a strong man shows signs of weakness, isn't it? And a few well-placed, well-paid informants. Another gift from the ever-resourceful, ever-mysterious anonymous benefactor, perhaps, got wind of this desperate move almost immediately. David, his eyes gleaming with a grim, almost feral satisfaction, brought her the news in their new, discreetly rented office space. A far cry from the opulent headquarters of Thorne Development, but a buzzing hive of focused, vengeful energy. "He's taken the bait, Elara," David said, a predatory smile touching his lips, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him that wasn't tinged with bitterness. He spread out the leaked financial documents on the scarred wooden table that served as their war room desk. The details were damning. This loan, the terms are ruinous, absolutely ruinous. He's leveraged everything. He's exposed himself completely. One more significant delay, one more major supplier default, and he won't be able to make the first repayment. He's vulnerable, deeply, fatally vulnerable. Elara looked at the documents, her expression calm, betraying nothing of the icy triumph that coursed through her. Her mind, always sharp, was already processing the implications, calculating the next series of moves, the final, killing blows. The scent of cheap coffee and expensive ambition filled the small room. The moment she had been working towards, the moment she had visualized in the darkest hours of her despair, was rapidly approaching. The noose, so carefully, so patiently crafted over months of sleepless nights and meticulous planning, was ready. "Good," she said, her voice soft but laced with unyielding steel. "Excellent, David. Now is the time to tighten it." The final, crushing piece of news, the one that would irrevocably shatter Marcus Thorne's carefully constructed denial, was delivered by a pale-faced, visibly trembling Alistair Finch late the following afternoon. Finch, looking like he hadn't slept in days and had aged a decade in the past few weeks, stood before Marcus's imposing desk, a single sheet of paper clutched in his damp hand. "Sir," Finch began, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes darting nervously around the opulent office, as if expecting assassins to leap from the shadows. "The Oakhaven Avenue land parcel, the one we absolutely needed for the eastern access route and the primary staging area for the Zenith construction?" Marcus looked up from the latest disastrous progress report, his face a mask of impatience and barely suppressed fury. "What about it, Finch?" Did you finally find out who this damned Vance strategic is? Did you make them an offer they can't possibly refuse? Double it, triple it. I don't care what it costs, just get it done. Finch swallowed hard, the sound audible in the tense silence of the office. Sir, Vance Strategic Holdings, they weren't the ones who bought it directly. It was another shell company, even more obscure, registered in some godforsaken Caribbean island. But we've traced the ultimate beneficiary. The final ownership, sir. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the plush, custom-woven carpet. He looked like a man about to announce a death in the family. Spit it out, man, Marcus roared, his patience gone, his voice cracking like a whip. Who is it? Finch looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of genuine fear and a strange sort of pity. The Oakhaven land parcel, sir. It was acquired by the Phoenix Legacy. The Phoenix Legacy. The name from the gala, the $1 million pledge, Elara's foundation. For a long, heart-stopping moment, the world tilted on its axis for Marcus Thorne. The sounds of the city outside, the hum of his empire, faded into an unbearable silence. The carefully constructed walls of his denial, his supreme arrogance, his utter contemptuous disbelief that she could be capable of this, came crashing down in a deafening, silent roar that echoed only in the tortured chambers of his own mind. Every strange event, every inexplicable setback, every perfectly timed corporate jab, it all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. Elara, he whispered, the name tasting like ash and bitter betrayal in his mouth. It couldn't be, but it was. The ghost from his past wasn't just haunting him, she was dismantling him, piece by meticulous, vengeful piece. He finally understood. He finally saw the architect behind the tremors now shaking his empire to its very core. And he knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones like a shard of ice, that he had to confront her. This wasn't just business anymore. This was war, and he was losing, badly. How could he have been so blind, so utterly dismissive? The realization hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs, leaving him gasping. His fury, now mixed with a grudging, horrified disbelief and a sliver of something that might have been fear, propelled him towards the one place he knew he could find her. His old home. Her new fortress. The battle lines were no longer hidden. They were starkly, brutally drawn. Dear friend, there's a moment in every life when silence falls, not from peace, but from the thunder of resilience stepping into the room. Elara Vance didn't just return. She rose. From betrayal, from pain, from being discarded like a forgotten page in someone else's story. And what the world mistook for ashes was the soil from which she grew. The Stoics taught us that nothing external can touch the soul unless we let it. Elara understood that. Her power wasn't vengeance, it was presence.